Hey guys, it's Boy, and today we're going to be talking about the Marvel villain known as Sun King. Now, why are we going over this character? Well, you see, lately there's been a rise in Moon Knight news, which I love Moon Knight. I think he's a very cool character. He has a very, messed up head, which is very interesting, and he also represents a hero that represents a lot for mental health people, like such as DID, which is dissociative identity disorder. But I'm going over Sun King because I do believe that Ethan Hawke will be playing this character, and I'll tell you why after we go over the history of this character. So, Sun King, he first appeared in Moon Knight number 188, Crazy Runs in the Family. And this story begins with a doctor named Dr. Emmett who is interviewing a patient known as Patient 86. He doesn't remember his past or his youth, but he came from the military, and she asked him, like, okay, so besides the bullying, what did you, walk away with from the military? He said, well, I can tell you this, I met God. All the skeptics, all the atheists, they're all wrong. I saw God in the fire. And the doctor, she's confused, like, what do you mean by this? And he tells her about this God and all this stuff and how he tried to become a devotee to it. And the other people in the military, they didn't really like that, so what they did is they pretty much bullied him. And he said, well, the only way I could get rid of him was to light them ablaze. We then learn that Doc Emmett has an obsession with Moon Knight and also compares this case to what Moon Knight dealt with, which is dissociative identity disorder. She then diagnoses this guy with bipolar, and he talks about a fire god. Well, Dr. Emmett is invited to a party where she is then made fun of because her delusions about Moon Knight, as the doctors call it. And then she gets the idea. This guy and Mark are so similar. What if I put this Egyptian idea onto them to help him, embrace what he is or whatever? And that's when it comes to her, Ra, the god of the sun. And she comes to him and she shows him, like, this picture of Ra, and, like, she's like, you know who this is? And he's just like, no, I don't. And she's like, this is Ra, the sun god. I think you should embrace this. And he says, I like this guy's hair, which is kind of funny. He doesn't even think anything of it. But over time, Dr. Emmett kind of teaches him all about these things. And what we learn is Ra is the son of Khonshu. Khonshu is the son of Ra. And they don't really have this good connection. And we also learned that the military guys actually tied him up and made him naked, and he also suffered abuse as a child. After all this, the doctor finally reveals to patient 86 of another case that she worked on similar to this, of a man named Mark Spector, also known now as Moon Knight. And of course, which is a terrible idea if the guy thinks he's, they're trying to embrace another Egyptian god, he starts reading into Moon Knight and becomes, interested in him. The doctor then goes to him and says, well, like, you're doing great, but we need to continue therapy so we can figure out who you are. And he's like, I know who I am. I am the servant of Ra. I'm his avatar. And the doctor's like, okay, this isn't going exactly how I thought it would, but okay then. There's not really much you can do. I mean, I don't know why you tell a mental patient that, but anyway. One of the guys from the military showed up at the mental hospital like, look, you gotta let that guy die because he can control fire. He killed my squadron. You have to get rid of him now. But they kind of take him off away like he's crazy. Well, they return back to the patient 86's cell to find blood all over the wall, and one of the nurses walked in here to bring him his pills, and he bit off her nose. And we found her like this, and so we tied him up and put him in a straitjacket. And the doctor asked, well, why did you do this? He said, she didn't believe who I was, so I made her embrace it. She then asks him, who are you? And he says, guess. And she says, Khonshu. He laughs. And he says, no, I'm Ra. And he sets the entire room ablaze. Like a fireball erupts out of him. And he ends up lighting the whole hospital on fire. And we also learn that he burned his past victims that had tried to abuse him. And he then escapes, and that's how the story ends. So continuing where we left off, in issue 189, you have Moon Knight dealing with a new villain called Truth. And this story, it focuses more on Moon Knight and Truth's battle than it does Sun King, but Sun King, what happened with him is very important. So Truth is basically this villain who, he puts his hands on you and he can make you speak what he believes is the truth. He also makes Moon Knight punch himself, but you gotta remember, Moon Knight is technically crazy. He has 3 different personalities in his head. And so, where most people would be like, dang, that hurt, he's like, I love this. And he beats the crap out of Truth. And we then go to Sun King, who is at a homeless shelter, who is asking about this guy. And they all tell him to go to this, a park, who then tells him to go to this homeless guy, who then tells him to go to this apartment building. Now, we don't know who this guy is yet, but when Sun King is about to walk into the place, he's met by these 2 thugs who they're like, oh, look at this. We got Jesus over here walking in. And Sun King kind of warns them, like, you want to take your hand off me, like, and the guys are like, what? Like, what if we don't? And he lights the dude's head on fire. He then walks in and says, look, I need your help. And he's like, I don't help. He said, I want your help killing Moon Knight. And that's when the man changes his response and says, okay, now you've got my attention. And this man is Raoul Bushman. And for those who don't know, Raoul Bushman is one of Moon Knight's most dangerous enemies, who was actually the guy who left him for dead in the desert until Khonshu found him and saved him and made him his avatar. In Moon Knight 190, we continue the story, and this story is when we finally get the Sun King and Moon Knight's first meeting. So this story begins with a little history lesson. So it turns out that the avatars of Khonshu and the avatars of Ra have been at war for years, from the Roman times to the Knight times to the Cowboy times to hell, even the World War II era. That's how far back this rivalry goes. And we then push forward to the present, where Bushman giving a speech to his people like, look, we all know Moon Knight's a pain in the butt, but with this guy's help, I feel like we can finally kill him. I feel like this dude, whoever he is, don't know his name, will be able to help us. And their plan involves going after someone who Mark Spector loves very dearly, which is a woman named Marlene. And so the Sun King approached her like, look, I come from this charity foundation. I was like, wonder if you'd like to donate. But in reality, he's not there for money. He's there for her. So he ends up barging in, and after talking to her for a little bit, he calls up Bushman, and they take over the house. They then take Marlene hostage and make her call Mark and tell him, look, I want to meet up. We haven't seen in a while. We need to have dinner. And of course, Mark is, he's a little weirded out because he hasn't spoken in years, but he's at the same time, he wants to see his old, fling. So he goes to Marlene's house. And when he gets there, he's met by none other than the Sun King, who Marlene introduces is, actually Mark is like, who's that guy? And before Marlene can say anything, Sun King interrupts and says, my name's Barry. And Mark thinks it's like, oh, this is like her new boyfriend or something like that. And they get to talking, they're having like a nice talk. And all of a sudden, you just have Sun King drop the big bombshell like, hey, look, this is nice and all, but I know who you are. And Mark's like, well, what are you talking? He's like, I know you're Moon Knight. I know you're the face of Khonshu. And Mark is like confused, but at the same time, he's also really pissed. And they also drop the bombshell that Jake Lockley may or may not have been piping Marlene while Mark wasn't aware of it. Bushman then comes out with Mark's daughter, who we just revealed he has a daughter, who is Jake Lockley's, and that's where the story ends. In Moon Knight number 191, we then continue where we left off with the dinner party, if you could call it that. So you have the revelation that Mark Spector has a daughter, and Sun King is there as well. Well, Marlene goes for Bushman's leg and stabs him with a knife to protect her daughter. And Mark, he kicks Sun King. They get into a fight, and Mark shoves, Bushman's head against the wall. And Mark, of course, he says some things to Sun King that piss him off. He then rips off and puts on a Moon Knight mask, and he attacks him in his boxers. Yeah, this is how you know this guy's crazy. But then again, he's also protecting his family, so he and Sun King get in a fight. When his daughter comes out during the fight, and he and his daughter end up escaping after he kind of beats up Sun King a little bit. And Mark takes her back to his apartment, where he reveals, like, look, I'm your dad. Jake Lockley's your uncle. And while all this is going on, Truth is actually broken out of prison thanks to Sun King and Bushman. And they have another meeting where Bushman, which is this real funny part, where Truth ends up touching Bushman, and Bushman says, without Moon Knight, I can't live without him. He even slaps Truth over the head like, quit doing that. Which I just thought was extremely funny. And that was how this story ended. In Moon Knight 192, we then continue the story, and in this story it begins with Mark breaking a window to his apartment, and he goes outside with the Moon Knight mask and confronts a crowd of people led by none other than Bushman. And Bushman makes this comment like, there you are, you gargoyle riding, cuss word. And Moon Knight comes down, and he's like, where's Marlene? They're like, we'll take her to her, but you have to come with us. And he comes with them, and they pretty much tell him, look, she's on this island, and we have to transport you there to her. And Moon Knight, he agrees. But Bushman has other ideas. He decides to tie up Moon Knight to a chair, and he puts him on this cargo boat on their way to the island, and he kind of threatens Moon Knight. Moon Knight breaks out of the chair and ends up whooping everybody on the boat. He also breaks, or no, my bad, he cuts off Bushman's fingers, which, that's something Moon Knight would do. He then opens a cargo to find a bunch of people in there, and they're like, why are you all in here? They said, we want to go to Eden. And it turns out the island that he was being taken to was none other than Eden. And who is there on Eden? Well, none other than the Sun King, of course, who tells Moon Knight, look, Roth has found a hidden nation for all those who are just like us. And we're going to, help them and bring them into the light of this shadowy world. And he said, but we both know you're not going to attack me, Moon Knight, because you want to know where Marlene's at. He then responds, Moon Knight's like, yeah, that's true. And then Sun King's like, okay, now sleep. And Mark's like, oh, you drugged me. He then wakes up to a bonfire where Sun King is like, I'm going to make you embrace Ra. And he gets this vision of, like, between Ra and Khonshu, and Ra kind of makes a statement to Khonshu, like, you call me evil, but, you're really the evil one. I mean, what type of righteous god would choose some man, some mental patient, to be, their avatar and cause more problems than, stop? And at the end of this story, you kind of have this realization by Mark, like, oh my gosh, Ra is right, that I've been lied to by Khonshu for too long. In Moon Knight 193, we pick up where we left off, and we also come to the conclusion of this crazy run from the family store. So as you know, after the events of the last issue, Moon Knight is not in a good place right now. He's not trusting Khonshu, and Khonshu, he just kind of lost his belief in him. So Moon Knight is taken by Truth to a group of people who tells him to embrace the truth, and Moon Knight says, Khonshu can't save me. Then this group of people jump in and just start kicking the crap out of Mark, leaving him on the ground bloodied and beaten up. Now, we then turn back to his daughter, who is praying to God, Khonshu, whoever is listening. She says, please don't let my dad die. And it's almost very brutal, like what is happening to Mark. He's being beaten mentally and physically. And that's when he kind of comes to Marlene and is like, look, I don't know if I'm going to make it out of this one, but make me a promise. Promise me you won't let my daughter forget me. And Marlene, she's like, I'm not going to make that promise because you will get out of this. And Mark responds with, I don't think I will. And she begrudgingly decides to make that promise. Mark is then taken to a ring of fire to fight the Sun King, who says, if you put up a good enough fight, maybe, just maybe, I won't hunt down and kill your daughter. So they fight. Mark charges at Sun King, and Sun King shoots fire at him. However, Mark dodges, and when he goes to block a fist from Sun King lights his hand on fire. Now, Mark ends up getting his butt completely whooped in this, because Sun King grabs him by the head and just hits him and knocks his teeth out of his, out of his mouth. And it's a real brutal fight, but very enjoyable. And Mark also tries to block one of the attacks and ends up catching his hair on fire, and he's on the ground just in a very bad spot. The personalities in his head realize they're fighting for his daughter, and that's when the Mark Spector personality in his head says, look, from what I understand, it seems that Sun King gets his powers from his belief in being, the avatar of Ra. So what power do we have, since we are the avatar of Khonshu? And that's when Mark comes to this realization, holy crap, I have the power of crazy. And he jumps up in the air and smacks the crap out of Sun King, and he starts getting the upper hand. And that's when Sun King tries to use the fire to beat up Mark, and Mark's like, yeah, that isn't going to work anymore. He said, bow to Khonshu now. And that's how that story ended, with him beating Sun King. In Moon Knight number 200, we then have the return of Sun King, and a story that was like the final story in the Moon Knight series of the 2016 version. And this story, it's interesting, but also kind of crazy at the same time. And the story begins with a flashback to after the events of what happened on the island, where we learn that Mark, he's actually pretty nice to Sun King. He's like, look, I don't want to kill you. Like, I want you to actually get help because I feel like you could actually do some good. And surprisingly, Sun King agrees. Him and Truth both agree, like, look, we're going to go to a mental hospital. We're going to get the help we need. And, well, that doesn't last very long, because a guy named Ernest, who is a Nazi, he ends up breaking Sun King and Truth out of prison. Now, Ernest is actually the uncle of Moon Knight, supposed uncle, who is also a Nazi, who Moon Knight saw when he was younger kill a bunch of Jewish people, which, yeah, very gruesome. That would mess up anybody. It also gave him his multiple personality. So Sun King and Mark are fighting in the street because Sun King just shows up out of nowhere. But however, we learn that Sun King is not here to kill Mark, but he's actually here to help him. And he ends up burning up all these different cult members next to him to try to attack him. And he says, after everything that's happened, I've kind of disowned Ra because I don't want to be his avatar. I want to be something better. I want to be an ally to you. And Mark is kind of shocked, like, isn't this the same guy that tried to kill me on the island? But they kind of begrudgingly, create their own uh, partnership. And Marlene shoots him pepper spray when they go to her because they leave some of Sun King's guys to protect her. And we then go back to the city where Moon Knight and Sun King attack the society or whatever the cult is. And it's just a real brutal fight. You have Sun King's men attack the cult members, and you have Moon Knight attacking the rest of the cult members. And they get to a certain room where they find Truth has been literally hooked up. And Truth has also been brainwashed by the Nazi, who he breaks out and he puts his hand on Moon Knight and Sun King, and it almost seemed like they're about to get in a fight again because you got Moon Knight saying something to Sun King that's messed up, Sun King saying something to Moon Knight. Well, Moon Knight, he breaks out of it, ends up beating up Sun King, and all the different personalities play a role in this. You have Jake Lockley beating him up, Khonshu doing flips, and Mark Spector doing a lot of work. He then breaks Truth's arm, and afterwards, the fight, Sun King kind of tells Mark, like, I'm actually going to go this time to the mental hospital, and I think Truth should go too. And that was pretty much like the last we saw of Sun King at the end of the series. He turned himself into a mental hospital. And it's funny because one of the guys in the mental hospital is like, you should probably come in too. You don't have a shirt on. He's like, nah, just him. Now that we've gone over the comic history of Sun King, let's get into what we got about the new Moon Knight show. So most recently, there was a costume reveal for what Moon Knight looks like. And I absolutely love the costume. It's very Egyptian-like, which works for his character. And we've also recently, I've put together some clues from the Seth Meyers interview between him and Ethan Hawke on who Ethan Hawke could be playing in the Moon Knight series.
I should note that with those glasses, your long hair, and those candles, you're giving off a real David Koresh vibe.
I've based my character on David Koresh.
Have you really?
Yeah, so, I mean, I guess it's working. I wanted a Camaro, I want to ride in a Camaro. And, yeah, I can't believe you. I mean, you're good, Seth. You're good. Yeah. Or maybe I'm not out of character yet.
I should say, I was a huge fan of Mr. Koresh.
No, I don't know if we want to be on record saying that. I will say that he's the basis of great character inspiration.
Yeah.
Okay, so David Koresh, for those who don't know, was this cult leader who believed he was the son of God, and he caused a lot of deaths over in Waco, which I don't want to get into that because it's very sad and we don't want to do that. But David Koresh looks very similar to Sun King at some point. And look at Sun King, he's even pulling off the shades in this photo from the comic. And just like David Koresh, Sun King also started a cult. He also believes he's the son of a god, such as Ra. So I think when he says he's a great inspiration, I think that is another clue towards him being Sun King. Also during the interview, there was another little hint that is going to work, because during the interview, Ethan Hawke says something that leads me to believe Ra will be in the series.
We're conjuring ancient gods and we're fighting for good and evil, and it's very exciting.
Okay, so notice how he says ancient gods, not one god, gods. So we definitely could be seeing Ra, because Ra is another ancient god that Khonshu has to deal with. And notice we've also gotten set photos of Ethan Hawke's character rocking a beard and also a jumpsuit. So he very well could be playing Sun King, because Sun King does look like that. And we've also got him already saying ancient gods, and he's also inspired by David Koresh. So all those clues together do point towards Sun King. And notice how in this photo he's also in a park, so maybe he's going to meet with another villain, perhaps. Perhaps Bushman, but we haven't heard much about him. But we have heard that the villain Midnight Man has been cast. So could Midnight Man be teaming up with Sun King, or is Sun King meeting Bushman? I don't know, we'll just have to wait and find out. And while we don't know exactly the plot of Moon Knight at the moment, from what I speculate, from him saying David Koresh, talking about a cult leader, this version of Sun King I feel like is to be a very powerful cult leader who people are going to believe is like their messiah. And since the snap happened, a lot of people went missing and came back, maybe that has something to incorporate in it, but I highly doubt it. But what I will say is, I feel like there's going to be this giant cult following that starts, and Moon Knight has to bring it down because it's causing like chaos throughout the city, like riots and stuff, because everyone's wanting to praise this sun god, Ra. So chances are I feel like that's what's going to happen throughout the season. And then I feel like that later on, maybe if how Moon Knight will meet the Avengers is they're going to go to him for help when they start asking about this guy named Ram Tut, who is actually a variant of Kang who's from like Egypt. He was like one of the first versions of Kang that appeared. Yeah, that's honestly what I think is going to happen in the Moon Knight series, as well as his future in the MCU.